Today on Seahawks Forever, powered by BetUS, I'll be joined by Curtis Allen of Seahawks Draft Blog. We're going to get his thoughts on all of the training camp practices he attended this year and some of the things that he saw on the practice field that maybe weren't unveiled in the preseason games that he's looking forward to seeing once the bullets start flying on Sunday. And then we're going to dig into what Curtis does best, and that is the salary cap. Where do the Seahawks sit today? It's a lot different than it was just a few days ago. How is their salary cap situation moving forward? And then compare it to the other teams in the division, in particular, the 49ers, and some of the things they're dealing with some of their contracts of their star players right now. What kind of shape are they in moving forward? Who's in better shape between those two teams? Curtis Allen joining me next on the show today.
Michael Vick at BetUS.com. Catch an incredible 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits, plus 10% gambler's insurance. BetUS, my online sportsbook and casino.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Big week so far. We had the first ever Seahawks Forever fantasy football draft yesterday. My apologies to those of you who didn't get in the league. Over 70 of you asked to be in it. There were only 14 spots, so that was a tough one. But we had our draft yesterday. Haven't done a 14-teamer in a very long time. I was a little worried about grabbing enough depth. I like my roster, but then you start looking around the league, and don't you do this every year? You come out of the draft feeling good, right? Tonight I have a live draft in my main league that I've been playing every year for a long time. And you always walk away feeling good about your draft, and then you start to look at the other rosters, or you look at your week one matchup, and why does it seem like you're always, at least for me, always the underdog in week one coming right out of the gate, right? We'll see if it goes that way tonight, but that'll be fun. We'll give little updates here. We won't spend too much time on it because it's only 13 of you that are involved, right? Out of the thousands of viewers that we have. But we'll give little updates so you can kind of get a feel for who's dominating that league as we move forward. Also a big week. Got to see Metallica last night at Lumen Field. That was cool to see Lumen Field set up that way. And then a week from now, we'll be playing football. Wednesday, T-Mobile Park, Def Leppard, Journey, Cheap Trick. And then Sunday, the Seahawks at home against the Broncos at 1 o'clock. So to help get you set for that, I thought it'd be a good time to bring Curtis back and to reset the salary cap situation because it's changed in the last week. And if you go to Over the Cap or Spot Track, whichever one you prefer right now, and look at their salary cap number, you might think, oh, geez, what are we going to do? How are we going to keep everybody? Curtis is always so good at giving you the rational look at what the numbers mean and how they can be manipulated moving forward. And so he gives a very honest assessment about where he thinks the Seahawks are salary cap wise, and also just some of the things he looks forward to seeing on the field as we move into Sunday. So let's get to that. This is Curtis Allen of the Seahawks Draft Blog, which is Rob Staten's blog. He contributes there. If you haven't checked that out before, you are doing yourself a disservice, which reminds me it's time to get Rob back on the show as well and get his takes after we get into this season. So anyway, here's my conversation today with Curtis Allen. All right, Curtis, thanks for joining me again. Not from Hawaii this time, so we're not going to get the tropical bird ambient sound in the background. I'm a little bummed about, to be honest.
Yeah.
But before we get into some of the numbers that you're so good at, I just want to get your impressions. You went to a lot of training camp practices this year. I think you said 6 in addition to the Lumen Field open practice. I want to ask you this because we see such limited evidence on the field in preseason games now about what's actually happening. What are some things that you saw consistently, individual players or just concepts, things that you saw in the practice field? You're not allowed to record or anything or take any video this year at practice, that got you excited or that intrigued you that maybe other fans don't know about because we didn't get to see that thing on the field in these preseason games?
Probably the first thing that I saw that was really great was the defensive setups when they were doing scrimmages. They were never the same from play to play, snap to snap. The defensive linemen were moving around, shifting each other, and doing a lot of interesting things. So what I thought of that is it really showed what Mike McDonald is going to be showing of his defense and expecting of his defense, because from play to play, you had all kinds of different things happening, and you had some very confusing setups from time to time for the offensive line. So they were always sort of kept in suspense and kept off balance. So I'm going to be interested to see how that translates into gameplay, because we're pretty well used to having Pete Carroll kind of having a set style. When the guys line up on the defensive line, that's where they are. And that's not, there's nothing bad to that. It's just different. So that was a big thing that I noticed. And in the back of my head, I wondered if we talked about the offensive line kind of having trouble and getting used to working together and all that. I started wondering, is it because the defensive line is just so good and it's keeping them so off balance with all of their different formations that there might be some, I called it a hidden offensive line that actually might be halfway decent, because they're playing such a good defensive line in practice that maybe come game time, the offensive line might be a little bit better. That was one of the big things that I noticed the most, that really struck me as something. There were plays where you have big heavies on the outside, on the edge. Like Jared Reed would go out on the edge for a play. Byron Murphy was moving around quite a bit. Leonard Williams was off and on, inside and then outside. So there was all kinds of different combinations. There was all kinds of different things that they were doing. And it felt like whenever they did a really strange looking setup, the offense kind of had a hard time adjusting, and they usually had a good rep on that particular play. So I thought that was interesting. It's something to look forward to. We as roster guys, we talk about, well, who's going to play the defensive end on this, because this guy got traded. How is it going to work? I'm tending to kind of say, I don't know if we need to worry about that so much, because they have so much crossover appeal now with versatility with the guys. And if you remember early in camp, I think it was one of the earliest introductory press conferences, Mike McDonald said, everybody on the defense better be ready to blitz. They better be ready to know how to blitz. So, there's going to be pass rush coming from different spots. And I'm, as someone who kind of got a little tired of the Pete Carroll same old defense, I'm really looking forward to seeing that translate to the field of how they, from play to play, from series to series, and making adjustments and keeping opponents off balance.
Yeah, especially facing a rookie starting quarterback playing his first game in the NFL this weekend. And we certainly didn't see any of that creativity you speak to, because, it was a lot of 4-man fronts rushing 4 in the preseason is what we saw. And now likewise on the offensive side of the ball, we have heard so much about how Ryan Grubb loves motion, and we did see some of it. We saw some exotic formations during the preseason, but we didn't get to see any of the, we didn't see Kenneth Walker. We didn't see any Zach Charbonnet. We didn't see any Tyler Lockett or Noah Fant. Were there similar things that you saw the offense doing that they weren't then also doing in the games?
I think to a degree, when we have the practices, it's more basic with what they're doing, is trying to establish the base offense, make sure that they're knowing where their assignments are. And I think the real cool stuff is being worked on inside the VMAC, and we don't get to see a whole lot. But one thing that I did notice, and I thought was going to be something that might be an interesting element this year, Ken Walker running routes. They have him line up next to Geno and then motion out and get, whoever he gets, safety or linebacker. I thought he was a very good route runner in preseason. So seeing some of those practices, I was surprised. There was a couple where I think it was either Julian Love or Kayvon Wallace. He lined up against him, and honestly, he smoked him on the play. He had him juked out of his shoes. He had a wide open route. Geno hit him, and off to the races. So I think that might be something interesting. But we didn't get to see a ton of like really cool, creative stuff. Also because the offensive line is still trying to find its footing, and they're just trying to get that stuff. But I can tell you this is they're not gonna sit around at the line of scrimmage and just kind of get cute and fancy. They're gonna attack the field. Everything that we saw was very much like the UW offense with Michael Penix, and Roma Dunze and Jalen McMillan and Jalen Pope is, you're going to have to defend every corner of the field. And then we're going to take advantage of pockets underneath that you can't defend because you're so worried about DK Metcalf and JSN and things of that nature. So I'm really excited to see how it's going. But I do think they're cooking behind the scenes, and we won't see much until we actually get in the game next week.
Are you saying that we, after decades, literally, of this being a frustration among the Seahawks fan base, that we might actually see a team that's good in the screen game and good at getting the running back, their running backs, the ball in space in the passing game? Is that what you're telling me?
I think there's a possibility that we're going that way. I thought it was interesting that they only kept 3 running backs on the final roster. Of course, George Holani got picked up on the practice squad, which I was very pleased about. But if you look at it, you've got Laviska Shenault, who is going to be used in space. I think he can kind of be a sort of a 4th cornerback or running back in that game. And so using him as kind of an interesting little piece. So you've got guys going downfield, you've got Noah Fant down the seam, and then you've got a complementary piece like Laviska Shenault, sort of taking those shots right at the line of scrimmage, making a couple of guys miss. And I think that'll be an interesting thing. And yes, I do think there's going to be a little bit more of passing to the running backs, because I think, like I said, we're going to see some things that are just so dynamic that the defense is going to be focused too much on the weapons that they have going downfield. And there'll be some points where they'll be able to use that. And that's not too far off what they did. Like in the Washington game last year, Geno dumped off, I think he had a 2-yard pass to Kenneth Walker, and he took it to the house.
Mm-hmm.
So because there was just too much focus on what's going on downfield. So they had guys running routes to kind of clear that right side of the field, and it was off to the races. So, yeah, I think there's going to be a little bit more of that. I think it's going to unfold. I think the way this offense is going to work, everybody's learning the offense. They don't want to show all their tricks in week 1. I think there's just going to be some things that just kind of unfold as the season goes on. So if we don't see it week 1, week 2, week 3, it's definitely coming.
Now, we're almost a full week removed from teams having to set their initial 53-man roster, and we all make such a point to emphasize the word initial when that happens, because usually some of those moves are strategic to try and protect guys, not expose them to waivers initially until teams set their roster. And then there's a lot of adjustments made. Yeah. Seahawks traditionally have done that. Usually the roster that they get to September 1st with, or get to the first game with, is not the same one that they set on their initial. They haven't made a single change on their roster in the last 6.5 days. Does that surprise you?
A little bit. I think they're looking around at things and they're seeing what's going on. I think they have a fair amount of confidence in the roster that they set. Now, there may be an element that we're not aware of, that Pete Carroll had a particular hand in some of those moves. But I think what they'd be looking at are positions that they're already pretty well strengthened at. The only question I have, and this is not my own question, is a third quarterback. They've not put a third quarterback on the practice squad yet. I know that means that they're confident that Sam Howell and Geno Smith are healthy, but they're one of the very few teams that are actually doing that. And so is there somebody out there they'd like to develop, or would they go a more veteran route like a PJ Walker or something? So that one was a big one. I also thought it was very interesting that they kept D. Williams on the roster. I'm not saying they should not have done that, but
Right.
he's basically a returner only. He did not show very much as a cornerback in the preseason games. There wasn't much to look at there. So it shows that they're shifting to what the league wants is going to do with this kickoff, this new kickoff situation. And who knows, that it may just evaporate. All teams might decide just to
we don't know yet.
back, and we're not even going to bother with it. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out as well. That's a very specialist spot that they kept on the roster, and having 4 cornerbacks and D. Williams as a 5th cornerback, it could be challenging. And I think they're counting on R.D. Burns being the week 1 call up. There's a little contractual stuff. As a vested veteran, his salary doesn't guarantee if he's not on the active roster week 1. He would then come up afterwards. But now he went out and got banged up again the very next practice. So that's going to be interesting. It's going to be something to watch.
Yeah, that's the one spot. I mean, 4 corners is pretty thin. And had Greg Bell on the other day, he said that, that the way that they play their back end, that they kind of use their safeties in that role. We're going to see a lot of 3 safeties that might mitigate some of that. Kayvon Wallace's role may almost fit into some sort of a quarterback type of a definition, or cornerback. But yeah, the D. Williams thing is interesting. And I love your point about, we'll see, maybe 2-3 weeks into this, teams just won't kick it to the return guys anymore, and they'll just take it to the 35, right? If it hits in the landing zone and goes out of the end zone. And maybe that's not worth carrying that roster spot for. And it kind of seems like that was a predetermined move. I think he had the biggest guarantee of all the undrafted free agents. Like, they targeted him as a return guy. Interesting. Although I'm not upset about it, because they kept the extra offensive lineman. And I was one that I was on record as saying, I just wanted to protect all those young guys, all of them, because I think they all have upside. I think there's a really good chance that Mike Jarrell and Satawa Lamea are starting offensive linemen long-term for us at some point. And so protecting those guys, I think is smart. And you mentioned, now we're kind of finding out perhaps that things are being done a little bit differently under Mike McDonald and Pete Carroll. Pete might have been adamant that, nope, I need a 5th corner, or I need another nose tackle type defensive tackle, which we all kind of thought they might be looking for and go shopping for. But to your point from earlier, those 6 defensive linemen they do have can play just about any position on the line. And so some of that new versatility in the way McDonald views his defenders kind of allowed them that extra roster spot, didn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's one of the key points that we're seeing there, is the change from the head coaching and their philosophy. There's been a lot of talk when Darrell Taylor got traded. What are they going to do with Travis Gibson? Things of that nature. And, oh no, we only have 4 outside linebacker types. But I'm not as concerned about that with all the opportunities that Mike McDonald is going to give his defenders. It's very possible that Devin Witherspoon has an amazing year rushing the passer. He may have 6 or 7 sacks and some really good impact plays. We've seen him, what he can do, and I'm sure that McDonald is just drooling at the thought of using him in all kinds of different ways. And then you saw Mike Morris. He can go all up and down the line. You saw him drop back and actually bat a pass away in coverage. And then in the Cleveland game, you had him actually stand up, drop back a little bit, and be a spy on DTR. And DTR took off running, and he caught him right at the line of scrimmage. So, there's versatility there, there's skill there, and with what McDonald is implementing, I think it'll be very interesting to see how you can do that. And that's coaching. Honestly, that's what coaching does for you, is it helps you conserve and then use a roster spot in other places where you think you might have a really nice gain from the offensive line, where you can really pick up some strength there on the roster and have some depth. I was pleased that they kept so many young players on the offensive line as well. And when they said, 11 offensive linemen, John Schneider said, we thought about 12. And so I mean, there was a very strong determination that they need to pick up some depth there. And honestly, after the contract that Damian Lewis got, if you can develop a 6th round guard into a starter or even a swing player, that's incredibly valuable. I don't know if you remember, but 2 years ago, they had Jamarco Jones as a free agent.
Yeah.
Tennessee went and gave him a 2-year, $4.8 million contract. And I just about dropped my teeth. I was like, what is going on here? He was a swing player, emergency use only, a backup. Yes, he was versatile, but I wasn't in any way a fan of the Seahawks trying to keep him at that number. So and of course, the spending on guards has just gone crazy. So is there a spot on the offensive line that is a cheap spot now? The league says no.
Yeah. Yeah. And they've hedged, they've built layers now. They've given themselves multiple bites at the apple in trying to develop young offensive linemen, where it felt like in the past, more so to Schneider's comments last offseason, that like guards and interior offensive linemen tend to be overdrafted and overpaid, that maybe that was a little bit of a spillover from Carroll's philosophy that, hey, we don't need to roster a bunch of offensive linemen that aren't going to play. We can find those guys, which, doesn't seem to be true, because then ironically this year they keep those guys because they didn't think they were going to make it through waivers, because teams are looking for that type. So I thought that was interesting when he said, we almost kept 12. I assumed he might've been thinking that McClendon Curtis would have been the 12th guy to make it, because they'd given him so much run in the preseason. But
well, and they stashed Curtis and Raekwon O'Neal all year last year.
Actually. Yep.
So I'm always fascinated by that, how they, then they let those guys go in favor of the younger players.
Yeah.
Which I have to say I like, because I don't know about you, but I'm the guy when they stash a player, it's like the backup quarterback is the most popular guy on the team. I think this guy is being stashed, and he's doing like a Rocky montage all year long. He's working out, he's practicing, and then when he comes out the next year, oh man, he's just going to blow people off the ball. And it just doesn't happen that way. I wish it happened that way, but it doesn't always happen that way. So seeing both of those players cut, I don't know if it was a pleasant surprise, but it was a bit of a surprise for me. But keeping the young players there and then developing them, I obviously think that was a Grubb and a Scott Huff move as well. They had significant input into those moves.
Well, and ideally the number is probably 10. They're not going to keep 3 centers. I think as soon as they know that Connor Williams is 100%, they'll make a move with one of those guys. As someone who's become a huge fan of Jalen Sundell, man, I hope they either find a trade partner for Oluwatimi or are able to get Sundell through waivers, because I think he has more long-term upside than Oluwatimi does. We'll see how that works out. And maybe it's just as simple as that once they get that figured out, they move, they go back to 2 centers, and then they elevate Burns full-time at that point to the 53-man roster. Let's talk some numbers. This is what one of the things you do so well. The Seahawks had one of the things that made me think this is I was watching one of my colleagues, one of the, someone who produces Seahawks content out there, who shall remain nameless, who put a video out a few days ago with the big salacious headline about how the Seahawks were getting ready to make a massive personnel move and a big trade to acquire someone because they had $13.5 million in cap space still. And then we wake up the next day, teams have to set their rosters officially, and it's actually $4.2 million according to Over the Cap now. Where did that money go, Curtis?
So what happens when you go to the 83 or the 53-man roster, you have to have a practice squad. And so the practice squad money goes against the salary cap at that point. Officially, it doesn't until Sunday. But yeah, it's there. It's on the cap. And it's something you have to account for every year. So I always think it should be a minimum of $6 million for a whole year. I always, fudge it up to about $7 or $8 million. That way you have enough room to make some moves so far. Also, players that are injured, that go on injured reserve or PUP, they count against the cap as well. But you have to have players on the roster to replace them. So you basically got sort of a double hit there. So it's something that's fairly standard. It happens every year. And it is challenging because I'm the guy all year long that says, oh, don't forget, you've got to keep about $6 to $8 million for
Right.
these expenses. So it's something that fans can anticipate, but seeing the cold hard reality of it when the cap drops like that, it's like, oh, okay, I guess they can't go shopping, or they don't have a bunch of money to spend at this point. So when you
And
talk
that's where the term effective cap space comes into play, right? When you hear people quote cap space numbers, they're not oftentimes quoting effective cap space, which takes those factors into account that you're talking about, right?
Yeah, usually during the off season, effective cap space is if you have 40 guys on your roster right now. Effective cap space takes into the next 11 players at a very minimum salary to get up to 51. So, but yes, during the season, that's effective cap space as well. So, yeah, so it's something I always feel as a cap guy, I always feel like the like the 50s dad with his pipe and a newspaper going, Jimmy, you better put some money in savings because for a rainy day, here we go, that sort of thing. So, but it is an annual expense. It's something that everybody has to account for, and the Seahawks have done that, and they're fine. They're fine. They have $4 million according to Over the Cap. It'll be a little bit less by the time the season rolls around and they make some changes, but they're in fine shape. They just don't have that money at the moment if they want to go shopping again and pick up a super great piece that's expensive.
Right.
In season before the trade deadline. They'll have to make some moves to open up some cap room if they want to do something like that.
And then for fans who like to look ahead, they might be a little nervous looking at 2025 for the Seahawks. They're bottom 10 in the league in cap space. They were at one point a couple of weeks ago when I checked it, about $25 million over the cap for 2025. That number seems to have settled in at about $18 million over. Is that something fans should be concerned about, or not, I guess, is the question, because, now that it's down under 20 million, I mean, shoot, that could be absorbed when the cap goes up next year, right? Just to start with.
Yes, absolutely right. That's exactly what's going to happen. Over the cap has them under the cap, or over the cap by about $18 million. That's based on a $260 million cap, which is just a projection on their point. And it doesn't settle until March of next year. So it's all based on projection. And Jason Fitzgerald of Over the Cap, he had a podcast, and I asked him, I said, hey, just best guess cap for 2025. He said, I don't know yet. We're not there yet, but he said 275, 280,000. So there's 20 million, 15 to $20 million. That gets them to about zero. They'll roll over a little bit of cap. You always want a little bit of money to roll over. And so they'll be about even. And then, the expenses come, and then they make changes, and there's the draft to think about. And then the almighty practice squad in the fall, you've got to sock away $6 or $8 million. But I think the Seahawks are actually in good shape cap wise. One of the things about the salary cap that's always a struggle for fans, and even myself at times, is you see not as much salary cap bad, lots of salary cap good,
right? And
it's harder than that. It's deeper than that. So, for instance, the Seahawks have 44 rostered players for next year. So, cap wise, they have almost all their major positions set. As far as
that's a pretty high number for
correct
around the league. Yeah.
Yes. It's very good. It's probably in the top 5, if not in the top 10 at this point. And at this point, they have their, some of the biggies set, their quarterback, they've got a couple of wide receivers set. They've got, the pass rushers set. So a lot of the pieces are in place next year. So when we do a roster look next spring, there won't be a ton of stuff to be concerned about. They'll need to figure out if Connor Williams, they want to bring him back. One of the two linebackers, Baker and Dodson, I'm going to guess one of the two will be back, not both, because Tyrese Knight looks pretty good.
Yeah.
But we're talking about a center, and we're talking about linebackers. We're not talking about, the biggest money and the biggest holes on the roster. Trey Brown might have a fantastic year and either price himself out of Seattle or come back at a nice contract. So that one might be a little bit expensive. But no, overall, I think they're in good shape. They're just going to have to make some decisions about some of the more expensive players on the roster. Tyler Lockett, Draymond Jones, Geno Smith, and then whether they want to extend DK Metcalf, which they should, but that's my opinion.
Just a quick moment to remind you to hit that thumbs up if you like this video. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's the best way to support it. And hit that bell button so you get notification of future episodes. All the other ways you can support the channel are linked down below in the description. Meanwhile, how good are you feeling about the Seahawks? Do you think they have a chance to win the Super Bowl this year? BetUS is putting it at plus 6,500, a chance to win some real money if you're that confident. If you want to get started today, click the link below, set up your BetUS account. They'll give you a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. That'll be a big topic of discussion next year. Certainly when you look at 2026 impending free agents at the wide receiver position, he stands above that whole list. So he'll be in an interesting position next offseason. I think he knows it and the team knows it, and that'll be a big topic of discussion for sure. And then Draymond Jones is interesting because we haven't seen a lick of him yet in this defense. Was he out there? Because you talk about versatility. He's one of the guys that essentially is being earmarked for a position change, playing more on the outside, some outside linebacker as opposed to interior. Was he out there at all much for any of the practices you were able to attend? Were you able to see kind of how they were using him at all during that time that he was healthy?
I didn't see him very much. I missed him quite a bit. He was gone on a lot of the days that I was there. The first day I noticed he was there, and they had him as a standard defensive end, 3-point stance, hand in the dirt. And they didn't use him at all in that outside linebacker like we saw some of the Instagram reels of him practicing the spot during the offseason. So they didn't use him at all in that spot. Now, I'm not saying that that's definitive and that's the way it's going to be, because Mike McDonald, his whole thing is versatility. So how they use him will be very intriguing to see how they use him, because I think he'll be just like the other guys. He can rush inside. He can rush on the outside. And I think the way they coach, they're going to use players the way they should be used. So the Seahawks last year used him a lot just to kind of stop up the middle and have a powerful interior pass rush. He's more of a slasher inside. And they didn't really use him the way he should be used. In fact, if you remember, when they traded for Leonard Williams, Dre Jones just took off. He started playing a lot better. And they asked him what's going on, and he kind of took a deep breath in the press conference and said, well, they're playing me where I'm used to playing now. So, I understand that was the previous regime. I think this regime is going to use him more to his strengths. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where he fits in. I'm just worried because he just hasn't practiced much. He hasn't played much. And I want to see him out there because he's really the fourth outside linebacker. You've got Boye Mafe, you've got Derek Hall, you've got Uchenna Nwosu, and then you've got Dre Jones. So you've got a really good 4, but 2 of them are banged up right now. So
yeah, and he's one of those guys that provides a lot of that financial flexibility for next year. If he doesn't have a great year, it's all eyes are on Geno this year, and it'll be a big question what they do with him financially next year. But Draymond as well. If he's a huge piece of this defense and he and McDonald click and he has a really productive year, then it's a contract they can easily live with and continue to live with, and maybe even adjust and extend it to free up some space next year.
There is one thing though, Dan. They restructured his contract this offseason with Draymond to free up some cap room, and they pushed cap room into the next year. Now, honestly, for me, that kind of popped a question mark, because last year they did that with Jamal Adams, Quandre Diggs, and Tyler Lockett, and they ended up cutting 2 of those 3 this year. And so that money that they pushed forward became dead cap. So I'm hoping in my heart of hearts, I'm hoping pushing that money forward is a signal that this is the guy. We like this guy. We want him around long term, because you talk about with flexibility next year, if they have to make a move on him, that all that money just accelerates into the cap, and then we have another situation with dead cap. So I'm hoping that was a real sign of confidence about how they feel about him and how he's going to produce.
You might be right. It's one of the reasons I just can't wait to see him on the field, because from day one, Mike McDonald has been using terms like, we have a cool plan for Draymond. Like he's been really enthusiastic about what they can do with him, and we just haven't seen it yet. And I've kind of wondered that, I'm not questioning whether he has a legitimate hamstring pull. Of course, if a guy can practice, you're going to want him to practice. But just the fact that maybe they were slow playing that a little bit, just because they didn't want to take the wraps off of it. Have you been able to see enough from Joey Lane and how he structures contracts? He has had an opportunity to redo some things and sign some guys to pick up any major differences or shifts philosophically between Matt Thomas, the ex-cap guy, and maybe moving forward, how they'll handle some of these deals?
I think there's still more to come. There was Leonard Williams. It looks fairly simple at this point. Draymond Jones was an interesting one to me, because if we wanted to restructure a player, I would have picked DK Metcalf to restructure. There's 5.9 they could have gotten, 5.9 million they could have gotten from him. I'm fairly confident that they'll want to extend him next year. So it would fatten up his cap hit next year, but then they lower it by extending him. And my thesis has always been, when you restructure players like that and push money into the future years, you need to have those players on the roster in the future as well. Like the Rams did with Aaron Donald. They restructured him every year. And it didn't matter, because he was so fantastic and he wasn't going anywhere. So that was one thing, and we'll see over time how that works. But I did think that the way they got their undrafted free agents with guaranteed money, that was different. So, and it's an interesting spot, because what happens is they only get the guaranteed money if they're on the roster or on the practice squad. If they're on another team's roster or practice squad, it's an offset. So Seahawks don't have to pay that for cutting him. So it's an interesting technique. So a player out on the street that signs for, say, $100,000 guaranteed salary, when they sign with the Seahawks, whether it's with the Seahawks or the Browns or the Titans or somebody else, they're going to get $100,000. So that's interesting. So that's more of an attractive inducement for those players to come and play for the Seahawks. Whereas in the past, their attraction was, hey, look, Doug Baldwin, Curse. Look at these guys that we pulled off undrafted free agents, and now they're stars for us, and they're making $8, $9, $10 million a year. Right. So that was the attraction then. Now it's a little bit more finance based, and I'm going to be interested to see how they do with that going forward.
Are you a little bit more optimistic now that a deal that makes sense for the player and the team can be struck next year with DK, because the 49ers kind of won their negotiation with Brandon Ayuk? They held their ground. They refused to go higher than they did. They wanted to stick to 30 million APY, and he ended up caving and signing that deal. Does it feel to you like maybe that wide receiver market that's been getting more and more out of control by the month, we've kind of seen the top of it?
It could be. I don't think so. We've got CeeDee Lamb, we've got Jamar Chase,
right?
And there's one more that I'm blanking on that's still out there waiting on us.
T. Higgins.
Yeah, T. Higgins.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot of that, and we'll see how they go. Now, the Jamar Chase deal, I just saw some chatter this morning that he's asking for more than Justin Jefferson got. So we'll see how that works out. And if you want my honest opinion on Brandon Ayuk, he's not in the tier with those top 5 guys, but he's making that really top money. And you can kind of tell that. This morning, Albert Breer had a breakdown on his on the trade and how it went down and so on and so forth. nobody was offering the Niners a first-round pick. Everybody was offering a second-round pick and a future third-round pick, or a second-round pick and a player, that sort of thing. So it kind of shows you the trade value and the contract value may not exactly line up. So it really depends with DK Metcalf. How does he do in this new offense? Right. And how do they use him? Are they going to have games where he's not targeted until the first or second play of the third quarter because the coach grabs the offensive coordinator by the scruff of his neck and says, "What are you doing? Get the ball to DK Metcalf." Or are they going to feed him as much as he can, and he'll have one of those, like the Philly game a couple of years ago, 15 targets, 12 catches, 179 yards, and a touchdown, sort of thing. So it really depends on how he goes, and then really, does he want to test the market? Does he really want to play it as hard and as fast as Brandon Ayuk and some of these other receivers are doing? They're going right up to the line until the very last minute. So I think there's a lot of factors in play. I would like to say that we've seen the top of the market, but I don't think we have yet.
Well, and from DK's perspective, he's going to know I think he's 27 now. He'll be 28 next year. Like it's going to be his last big deal, very likely. He's going to try and get every penny he can. Looking around the division, you mentioned earlier that, the salary cap can look bad sometimes and it's not, and vice versa. It can look really good sometimes and it's not. Mm-hmm. If you're a fan, you go to overthecap.com right now and you look at cap space in the league, you're going to see that the San Francisco 49ers have $44 million in cap space. With all those great players and all of those big salaries they do have, like your first thought is, how does that happen? Then you look ahead to next year and they're $39.4 million over for 2025. And now you start to understand, okay, this is why they haven't given Trent Williams a bunch of new money yet. Next year's the year they have to figure out what to do with Brock Purdy. How would you assess? We talked about this on Twitter a little bit the other day. You kind of cautioned me against saying, hey, the cap bubble is about to burst for the 49ers. What would you tell a Seahawks fan about how their division rival is doing against the cap these days?
They're very clever with the cap. They work a lot more than the Seahawks have traditionally done as far as manipulating and massaging the cap over the years. Don't forget, next year you said $38 million over the cap. They're going to get the $20 million benefit that everybody else is. So it'll be $18 million over the cap, which is where the Seahawks are right now. But they get to roll over that $44 million if that's what they end up the year with. So between 24 and 25, they're in the black as far as the cap goes. And the Brandon Ayuk contract, if you look at it over the cap, is really interesting. The first 3 years average something like $12 to $14 million. So this year, next year, and 25, and then it just explodes. It's 42 million and then 44 million, and then there's some void years after that. But those 2 really expensive years, there's no guaranteed salary. Mm-hmm. So they can come to a reworking, they can cut him, they can trade him, and save some money then, because right about then, 26, 27 is if they decide to sign Brock Purdy. That's when the contract, they're going to start feeling it and need to make some changes. So they've always been very, very smart, very clever with the cap. They let the defensive tackle go to Jacksonville this year. So they just didn't. Yeah, they just didn't have the money to keep that up, and they'll keep doing that. There'll be one of those a year. I would say probably Deebo Samuel is probably the likely target for next year.
Makes sense.
Maybe Javon Hargrave. He's hitting that early 30s, and maybe the expenses outweighing some of the benefit. Fred Warner as a middle linebacker has a gigantic cap hit next year and the year after. And we've found out with Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright, spending a lot of money on linebackers can be expensive. Mm-hmm. So I think there's more massaging to come from them. And just to keep myself sane and safe, I always assume that the Niners and the Rams are going to have plenty of cap space. So as far as the Niners collapsing, I mentioned this on Twitter, I think it's just going to be fatigue from can we get there again? Because it's been 2 championship games and 2 Super Bowls in the last, I think, 5 or 6 years, and they've lost. So at what point is there a tipping point with just the fatigue of it all, and it just becomes too much for the team?
Yeah, that Super Bowl hangover, they call it. But if you're going every year, you're going deep into the playoffs every year, yeah, eventually that does take its toll. We saw it right here in Seattle. Let me ask
your
you
body
this.
too.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, because I'm sure I've often wondered about this, and I think this 49ers situation is a perfect example to frame this question. They've got $44 million in cap space right now. They have an all-time great left tackle that has taken a hard line, wants some new money, and is holding out. It seems like whenever teams do these big deals, they always structure them in a way so that the first year cap hit is low, and then they structure it moving out, and they try to match it up long-term so that it fits in with some other big cap hits, ideally. Why don't more teams do this, though? Front load it. Give Trent Williams some new money if he wants it, whatever you have to do, but take some of that cap space that you have now and use it now instead of rolling. You know what I mean? Why don't more teams front load when they have the money available?
I think probably the biggest reason with that is the cap is just growing too fast. So if you can backload a contract, $10 million this year is X percent of the cap. $10 million next year is a lower percentage of the cap. So you're always pushing. If you're pushing things out and the cap is growing, it's advantageous to do that. And so what's happening is, if you have money this year and then you roll it over next year, it's better than an interest-free loan. It's like you're going to get 105% of your money because you're rolling it forward. And then if you roll it forward again next year, you're getting 110% of your money. So there's a lot of benefit to that. And that's why you see teams like the Philly Eagles constantly doing these void years and pushing money out. And right now, if you go on over the cap, it's comical. They've got sells for each year up to 2035 because they push so much money out. So it's crazy, but it's the value of a dollar drops every year on the cap. And so I can't say that's exactly why teams do it, but to me, that's the most obvious reason to do it is you get more bang for your buck every year. And so, and if you lower the cap hit, you can get under the cap and you can, spend money on other players that get you into the competition to fill out your roster.
And then looking elsewhere around the division, of course, the Cardinals are in great shape moving forward. They've got a bunch of cap space next year they can look forward to having. The Rams seem to have learned their lesson. They went for broke those 3-4 years in a row, trading away first-round draft picks as currency instead of using them, bringing in stars, then paying those stars top dollar and kicking the can down the road. They seem now to have gotten much more conservative to the point that they even go and trade a very, very good young interior linebacker in Ernest Jones for a day 3 draft pick because they didn't want to pay him. Is that a case of the Rams kind of learning their lesson and trying to make sure that they're more responsible with their check register moving forward?
To a degree, I think they very much did that, what they did the few years, because they had an all-time great player in Aaron Donald. They had Jalen Ramsey, who was one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL, and they just had to use it. They just had to optimize that by really capitalizing on it as best they can. Now, they did it more than I ever would have expected, trading picks away and constantly rolling money forward. But honestly, Dan, it worked. You ask fans, would you run up the credit card and win a Super Bowl? Every fan in the NFL would say yes. So, and really returning to Los Angeles, I'm sure there was some pressure with the Los Angeles Dodgers across town spending $500 million on Shohei Ohtani and, that sort of thing, that there was some pressure to really stock the roster as well. What's interesting, though, with this year is, that Ernest Jones trade caught a lot of people off guard. And a lot of fans around the league are saying, well, why didn't we get in on that? What for a starting linebacker for a middle round pick? I think what they're trying to do is maximize their base. They've spent a ton of draft capital on the defensive line. So they drafted, I think, the entire Florida State defensive line. They've got some good young players there, and they're trying to use the Moneyball term, recreate Aaron Donald in the aggregate. They can't recreate him because he took triple teams on and won half the time. And you just can't find players like that. So they're trying to have strength all up and down the line. And then I think what they're really trying to do with their investment in the offensive line is rely on the offensive side of the ball to be a juggernaut and really run up the score, and then let the defense sort of learn its way through and see how they can play together and be coached up in that way. So yeah, there is, if you want to call it a reset, there is a little bit of that for sure. I think they realize that with Donald retiring, their window to go bananas and, trade a second round pick for Von Miller for 6 games is not going to happen. But it's interesting because they keep developing young players behind it. That's the success, and that's the secret sauce in being able to run up the credit card. You always have young players on the roster that you're developing. So I think they're really banking on that to build their roster to start with. And then maybe in a couple of years, they can really start cranking up on the credit card again.
Yeah, and I do like what they did in the draft this year, especially on defense. They took a lot of dudes that I mocked to the Seahawks over and over and over again. I like what they saw. Folks, you're not going to get this kind of content anywhere else. Where else have you ever heard Aaron Donald comped to Jason Giambi? No, here from Curtis Allen. Curtis, thanks for joining me. Before I let you go, what do you expect to see on Sunday? Like, there's so much mystery. This thing's been shrouded. It's like the new prototype of the new car that's being unveiled. It's under the blanket. It's sitting over there, and you can kind of see the shape of the car. You can kind of get a feel for how cool it's going to be. But until they pull that thing away, we don't know what we're going to get. What do you expect to see the first time out?
I'd really like to see the offense control the game and really put the game in hand, and then let the defense feast. The Bronco defense is nothing to really get excited about. And I don't mean to bash an old friend, but Cody Barton is one of their starting linebackers in Denver. They have Patrick Surtain. Yeah, they have Patrick Surtain, but they don't have a real strength on the other side. Their lead pass rushers aren't, they don't strike fear in anyone. I think it could be a game where we get a lot of confidence about the offensive line having a good game. So I'd really like to see, sort of gear down a little bit, run with Ken Walker, get some things going, and also put some pressure on their offense by, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, JSN having, lots of opportunities all over the field. And I do think Tyler Lockett has kind of flown under the radar because everybody expects him to, be the definite number 3 after JSN this year. And there's some fans that have already retired him or traded him off the team.
Right.
I'm a cap guy, and I can be cold-hearted at times, but my love for Tyler Lockett will never die. He can stay on the roster as long as he wants for as much cap money as he wants. I think he's going to have an interesting year because he's going to feast on the number 3 corner, and he'll have plenty of opportunities there. But like you said, defensively, I think Bo Nix is going to see things that he's never seen before. And I think he's had a good preseason. He's shown some nice things. He's looked good. Sean Payton is saying all the right things. Yeah. But I think reality is going to hit. I'm not going to say it's going to be a blowout and he's going to get sacked 10 times and throw 5 interceptions. But a lot of these guys are playing against number 2 and number 3 defenses in the preseason. And with the strength that the Seahawks have, I think it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be a long day in his NFL debut. And everybody after the game is going to be going, well, it's his first game in the NFL and welcome to the NFL. And, they come to Seattle and, the fans are going to be rocking for that game. not just because it's the first game, but because it's a new coach. It's going to be Denver. Everybody hates Denver, just like the game when Russell Wilson came. And there's going to be some of that pride restored when the defense actually has a really good base to show from. So I'm looking forward to it. We've waited all year long. We had a new coach announcement, a new staff built. We had, the combine. We had free agency, the draft, camp, preseason. Now it's time to put it all together and show us what we got. And it's like you said, it is the sports car under the hood. Let's unveil it and see what we got.
It does seem like it's been the longest offseason ever because we've just been so hyper focused on every little piece of news and every little clue along the way, trying to figure out what this team's going to look like. Curtis 93969 is his Twitter handle, at Curtis 93969. If you want to follow him there and read his stuff also on the Seahawks Draft Blog that he contributes to Rob Staten's site. Curtis, as always, thanks for coming on the show. Even though the tropical birds didn't come with you, I still think it was a solid appearance. It was a solid appearance with no birds. All right.
Thank you very much, Dan. Anytime. It was a treat.
All right. We'll see you again soon. Thanks, Curtis.
Okay.
Okay. Switching it up a little bit on the outro music today. Thanks again to Curtis for taking the time to join me today. Later in the week, we'll do a proper preview of the Broncos game and also react to any Mike Macdonald press conferences this week and any hints that he might be giving about injury updates and who we might see on the field Sunday. Cannot wait. It is, once again, a home game at Lumen Field, 1:00. So the plan for the show is I am attending the game and then I will come home immediately afterwards, throw my thoughts together in some notes and go live and get your reaction, give you my thoughts, get your questions and comments after we witness in person the first ever game coached by Mike Macdonald for the Seattle Seahawks. Cannot wait. Follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. Shout out to the folks at BetUS for sponsoring today's episode. Until next time, forever and always, go Hawks. Thanks for watching, you guys.